Hello, my fellow comic book collectors. Today is Wednesday, and on Wednesdays I do my Q&A video. Basically, you get to ask me whatever questions you want about comics, hopefully, and I do my best to try to answer them. And these were the questions from last week. If you want to ask your question, though, put it in the comments below, and next week I will answer it. So let me read the questions from last week. This comes from Comic Mag Musings, and he wrote, "Here's my question, Alan. What is the backstory on the author of The Parade of Pleasure, Geoffrey Wagner? I believe he was a Brit that lived in New York for a while, but I don't know much else. Was he just a moralist that lamented the social decline of American society, or was something else at play?" Okay, so for those who do not know, I'll show you what he's referring to. He's referring to this book. This is The Parade of Pleasure, also known as Pop, and it's written by Geoffrey Wagner. And there's actually I did a whole bunch of searches to try to find a Wikipedia page about the author. I was trying to find, articles about him. Very hard to find, almost impossible. So, but there is within this book a biography about him, very short biography. Basically, for those people that are not familiar with this book, it's similar to The Seduction of the Innocent, which I'm actually going to answer a question about later in this video. And it's similar to that in the fact that it had a negative impact on comics. But unlike The Seduction of the Innocent, which focused mostly or only on comics, The Parade of Pleasure really didn't. It actually focused on three main elements of American culture and what Wagner saw as the negative impacts those were having on, he didn't really, he spoke about it as just, he was kind of just putting it out there in the way he presented it, that these are and almost left it to the reader to judge whether or not these things were immoral. And he kind of was very strong, he even explained very thoroughly that he was offering insight and just putting it out there in his criticisms of comics and movies and pinups. Those were the three things that he really focused on. His thing was really about a couple things. He would actually almost be considered an anti-feminist. There's so many parts of this book where he's really going on about how women were embracing a lot of male behavior, like wearing pants, and he really didn't like that. He thought that a lot of the sexuality that was being exhibited had sort of a dark tone to it. He felt like in movies he saw women in bondage and just inappropriate things that he felt that just reflected on a decay of moral decline. Okay, so a lot of his criticisms were about American culture and its influence on the rest of the world. That that American culture was really being exported all over the place. And he even criticized. It was actually kind of interesting. His introduction in the book, he basically talks about how often British people look down on Americans, and he criticized that. It's kind of interesting considering he is a British man. But he also talked about how a lot of British, creative people were seduced by the American lifestyle and, the pleasures offered by it. And he himself ended up, and he actually states this very specifically, he lived in the Negro part of Harlem. That's what he said. I'm quoting him. That's not such a kosher word nowadays, but he lived in the black part of Harlem. And so I think he would be considered a bit of a social justice warrior nowadays. But he was very clear that he was not a communist and that he was not against capitalism. Actually, he was pro-capitalism. but he was also had, he spoke about how he didn't really see himself as a political person, and he saw himself as somebody who was more about just pointing out things. And he actually did say that he did vote twice, and he voted both times for the Conservatives. So he is not, by any stretch of the imagination, like easy to pin down in terms of his ideology. But he was really just speaking about how a lot of these things were maybe showed moral decline, and really that was his commentary. Hypersexualization, hyperviolence, and that was really his problems. And I'm going to give you a few examples of some of the books that were mentioned in the Parade of Pleasure. And I got a stack of books that I'm also collecting some of the Parade of Pleasure books, or pop. It's easier to say pop. But here's one of them. Leave It to Binky, this specific issue he refers to. And he just, again, this is more about how women are taking men's roles. So that was his issue with this book, that, she's throwing her boyfriend around, and like, just that kind of manly, masculation of women, so that was kind of interesting that, he was saying this back in 1955. So, this, he would be shocked by what's going on now. And he mentioned this comic a lot, Crime Does Not Pay. This is Crime Does Not Pay number, I think 14, or sorry, I can't see. Oh, 111. Sorry, my vision's terrible. So yeah, this is just a great issue. But again, he really felt like these were kind of promoting some of the worst elements of mankind. And he mentioned a few of the issues from Crime Does Not Pay. And this is another one, which is 105. Another thing he had issues with, and it was kind of interesting, his commentary on it, was he was talking about a lot of the war magazines, and or war comics, I should say. And he was even comparing it to the Russian. He was like saying, he's comparing it to what the Russians would teach their kids through comics. And, he was saying that it was very different. It was very different. He was actually more critical of the Russians' propaganda. But, he mentioned, for example, Black Hawk. This is another one that was mentioned in Pop. And this was one that he really didn't like. Another thing he thought was really annoying about comics in a weird way was not only did they kind of have these weird things where it was hypersexualized, but also he felt like there was kind of almost looked down on women as well. It was kind of interesting that there was a bit of a strange thing there, but he felt like some comics kind of looked down on the intelligence of women. And one in particular he mentioned was Susie. So this is a book which has a couple things going on to it. And I'll explain. It's always worse when you explain the humor. But so basically the situation is, here's Susie, and she's basically kind of a ditzy blonde, the typical, blonde. She's getting her TV repaired, and the serviceman says, "I found the trouble, Susie. There's a short circuit on your set, on your TV set, in your TV set, sorry. Goody. Now all we have to do is make it longer." Now there's two jokes in that. So the one joke is that she's dumb, that she didn't understand that a short circuit just means that the circuit isn't working, and she felt like that it just had to be longer. But also, there's an implied sexuality there as well. There's that double entendre. So, yeah, it was one of those books that he kind of saw both things in it. And it is one of those books that was mentioned in Pop for those reasons. And as I said, he mentioned a lot of the war ones. He was against the hypersexualization, but hyperviolence was the big thing for him. So some more Black Hawk that was mentioned. You can see, kind of guy getting beaten like to a pulp, and like the typical over glorification of war, maybe. Guys like blasting up into the air and stuff like that. And then another one where it's like, the guy's like in bondage, being stabbed and shot and whipped. It's like, so it's like, these are all ones that he referred to. So there's really not much else to be said about Wagner. He was a very educated man, and he went to Oxford. He would write criticisms of books. That doesn't mean that he's putting them down or anything. He's just writing critiques of them. And he did this one book where he was really critiquing American culture. And that's really all there is to say about him, because there's so little information about the guy. So really you have to read Prey to Pleasure. And it's one of those books that strangely you can find online in a PDF format. So do some searching and you can find it. Okay, so the next question comes from David Rebello. And the first appearance of Flash is showcase number 4. So last time, and I actually should have grabbed it before doing this video. One sec. Okay, so I had to kind of grab something off screen. That was kind of interesting. So David Rebello wrote, the first appearance of Flash is in showcase number 4, drawn by Carmen Infantino and inked by Joe Kubert. People generally know the artist of the book, but not the inker, and that's often the case. Inkers don't really get as much fanfare or credit as they deserve, but I did actually know that that Showcase 4 was the first appearance of Silver Age Flash. I own the book. I don't know why. I misspoke when on my last Q&A video where I said it was number 8. I don't know why I said number 8, but I was thinking about a different Flash, the first appearance of Captain Frost. Okay, but I wanted to prove that I'm not a complete idiot, and I do know that Showcase number 4 is the first Silver Age appearance of the Flash. So that's that question. That was an interesting one. Next question comes from Richard Lashira. Can you tell us the questions at the start of the Q&A video? No, but I do put them in the description. So if you go to my description of any of my videos, I'll put information in there about what to expect in the video. So just check there and you'll see what questions I'm going to answer in the video. So I don't preference like the video by saying these are the questions I'm going to answer. I don't do that, sorry. I kind of want it to be a little bit exciting so that people don't know what to expect. When I don't have the time, he also writes, when I don't have the time, I jump forward in hopes of finding something interesting. Also, if you ever get the chance, can you do the best BWS covers for Conan the Barbarian? There are only 22 of the 24 that he did. 19 is my personal favorite. Okay, so actually I was going to prepare a few of those books that I have from Conan. Like I have the kind of the keys, actually I'm not sure if you can see it. I'm going to turn the camera, turning the camera, but up there is Conan the Barbarian #1. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I don't really collect Conan, to tell you the truth, but I do have like the keys because I do like certain characters from Conan the Barbarian. I actually did enjoy Conan the Barbarian movies. Barry Windsor Smith did the cover to Conan the Barbarian #1, and he did all the way up till number 17. Then 18 was Gil Kane, and then he did 19 through 22, And then Gil Kane did number 23, and then 24 was done by Barry Windsor Smith. So I have most of the keys within that group because number 24 is the first cover appearance of Red Sonja, not, I would say, the second appearance of her, because really 23 is her first full appearance. She appears in more than 20 panels, so it's really 23 that's the first appearance of Red Sonja. But I have all those books. I just didn't bring them to show. They're kind of buried right now. So, but I'm not a big collector of Conan the Barbarian. I do like some of the covers, though, and Barry Windsor Smith's covers are some of the best covers in the Conan series. Personally, my favorite would be Conan the Barbarian #1. I even like it better than the Red Sonja cover. I think it's it's that typical barbarian look, with him kind of holding the spear and the girl down at the bottom. Like, I always feel like there always has to be that juxtapose, where you have the superhero guy and he's like super strong and kind of defending this sexy girl that's on the ground, sort of lying on the ground. I always feel like that's a typical barbarian cover. So yeah, I that would be my favorite of his covers. But he did do a bunch of really great covers for those initial Conan the Barbarian. Okay, so hope that answers your question well. Okay, the next question comes from Matt Blogs. There's a question for you. While Wertham was undoubtedly an annoying person who had negative impact on the comics industry, was he actually a bad person? Were his motivations genuinely protecting kids, misguided though they might have been, or did he have a less noble motivation? Maybe his looking for his 15 minutes of fame. So a lot of people who criticize Fredric Wertham criticize him for the latter, which is that he was really just trying to get fame, and that even the book industry was really trying to leverage him and encourage him to go against the comics. So just to give you a bit of understanding of Fredric Wertham and the whole idea of the Seduction and Innocent, I actually brought my copy of the Seduction and Innocent, this book. So those who do not know, this is the book that caused the end of the Golden Age. Okay, so this is the book that there's the reason that there was a end of the Golden Age. Well, it's this book, the Comic Code Authority, this book, this book caused the collapse of the Golden Age and led into the Silver Age. Okay, so this is a very important book. It's written by Fredric Wertham. But who is Fredric Wertham? Well, and what were his motivations? So Fredric Wertham was a psychiatrist, and he actually worked at the Bellevue, what is it called? The Bellevue Hospital in New York. And it was basically the hospital for the criminally insane. So he would work there. He also worked where he was working with youth. And what happened was he created an opinion based on his experience working with these kind of people. So what happened was, if you look at that time period, it's very different from now in terms of how many comics were produced. Like during the Golden Age, because we always think of the Golden Age as, oh, the books are so scarce. But that is a really wrong way of thinking, because that's not how they were at the time. Almost, actually, it was Wagner that quoted all these nice little stats in Pop. He basically said that there was 880 million comics produced every year. So this huge, like, that just dwarfs anything that is produced nowadays. Like, it just, and the typical publication back then, any title, the typical one would have about 200,000 in circulation. That was how common they were. And comics didn't just appeal to boys. It was everybody read comics. So they looked at the averages, and it was like 80 to 90% of boys and girls would read comics. and there was much more variety back then in terms of comics. Basically, there was comics that covered any topic, any genre, much more diverse in terms of content than now. Part of the problem with comics nowadays is the lack of diversity of content, and it really kind of pigeonholes into very superhero kind of content. So, but back then it was not like that. They really did have a pretty good variety of content. So that was the kind of setting, okay, that there's pretty much everybody's reading comics, and when you say, okay, well, now he's looking at these criminally insane people, of course they read comics too. Everybody's reading comics, but he, instead of seeing that as just something that everybody is doing, and he kind of conflated the two things, that oh, they were criminally insane because of comics. that comics kind of helped, like, make that transition for them, that they kind of corrupted the minds of these people, and it was a poor conclusion to have drawn. A lot of the assertions made by Fredric Wertham were later debunked. It's just like he was wrong. He was just frankly wrong. But I would say he was not a bad person. I don't think he was really trying to be a person that was pro-censorship. He actually was he was a strong advocate for freedom of speech, which is kind of interesting because, he did lead to the end of so many comics. Like 1/200th of the companies survived his apocalypse. Like, it was really that bad, because once the Seduction was written, within a few months, the Comic Code Authority was put into play, and there was the hearings, and the whole thing collapsed. But I don't think necessarily he was intending for that kind of consequence. He was looking for more protections for the youth, that comics should be maybe segregated, so that there will be books for kids and books for adults, and there's no crossover. Like, maybe that kind of, not censorship, but kind of sorting out of comics where kids are not reading the same books that adults would read. And I think that would be more his line of thinking. However, Fredric Wertham, he is one of those characters that is seen as like hated by comic collectors and people within the comic industry. And he actually tried to make amends in a way. He wrote one more book about comics, and it is this one. This was actually his last book, and it was about fanzines, the world of fanzines. And he basically said that, he actually spoke very highly of fanzines, and he spoke about how they were a great creative outlet. So, and he didn't seek censorship. He actually sought more open and more creativity, I guess. So it's kind of interesting. The funny thing about it was, after he wrote that book, it was such a good book in terms of promoting fanzines that there was a comic convention, I believe, in New York, that invited him to the comic convention to speak on his love of fanzines. And he was booed and heckled in the audience, because by that, at that point, people were really upset about the effects that Wertham had on the comic industry. So he decided never to write again after that convention. So kind of interesting. So that became his very last book. So Fredric Wertham is one of those kind of interesting characters. I always like to think of it in this way, that good intention, like the way to the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I believe that he did have good intentions, but often the case is you can have great intentions, but just you can have very bad outcomes with those good intentions. So that is my interpretation of Fredric Wertham. I don't see him as I see him as annoying. but I don't really have a negative opinion about the man. So I hope you enjoyed this video. That was the last of the questions for this video. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please put it in the comments below and tell me what you think about this video. Thanks for watching.